We are now recording. Are there any questions? Does anybody have any questions about assignments, group work?
No.
Go ahead. I'll tell you what, Jen, this class is very low maintenance.
Yes.
I would say compared to all the classes that I have, I really get the least amount of noise from this class. I don't know what it is. Either I'm doing something right or y'all just don't like me. I don't know. So, but anyway, it seems like everybody's doing great in this class. But yeah, don't feel afraid. If you have any questions, please ask either Jennifer or myself. All right. So where do we leave off? So we left off with cognition. We were talking about problem solving abilities, how we use our past experiences to kind of guide us. Either we've done it by trial and error, or we followed a procedure or instructions of some sort, some kind of programmatic way of going or systematic way of getting our goal, right? And that's really what our aim is to meet our goals, whatever that might be. And that might be to get a job, right? That might be to even maybe just get dinner for the night or whatever. Whatever your goal is, we have to be able to solve that problem. And in order to do that, we base that off of our past experience, right? And we talked a little bit about that on Monday. So what we're going to really delve into today is the ability to adapt to our environment, right? How we use those processes in the past, going back a couple chapters to learn what worked, what didn't work. And are we going to do that again? Or are we going to try something different? Are we going to think outside the box? Are we going to try and meet our goals based on how somebody else met those a similar goal, right? So really that's what intelligence is, right? What is your, I'm going to kind of go around the room here and see what your definition, what is intelligence to you? When I say the word intelligence, what do you think? Who's got an idea of what intelligence means? What is it to them?
Someone's IQ.
Okay. So IQ, we'll talk about that here in a minute. What else? What does intelligence mean to you?
The capability of memorizing things, or just memory in general.
Okay, so memorize, okay? Or learn, right? What else? How about experience? What do we do with our experiences? Okay, so maybe it's not questions. No, nobody wants to talk today. Everybody's got laryngitis today. Adapt. Adapt to our environment, okay? Or one's environment. Your book gives the answer, environment. Can't talk and write at the same time. Your book gives the answer, the ability to learn from experience, acquire knowledge, and adapt. Adapt to one's environment. Okay, using those problem-solving skills in order to achieve what you need, achieve your goals. So, right around the turn of the century, 1900s, the United States experienced an influx of immigrants, a mass immigration from Europe and Africa and really all over the world. And prior to that, our school system had a very regimented way of teaching children. It was conformity based. And if you were in third grade, you knew your times tables or you knew the alphabet frontwards and backwards. That's just what the standard was. But what happened when we started accepting immigrants from all over the world is we're finding that there were significant cultural differences, right? Maybe parents weren't as educated as they were in the United States, for example, or the children weren't learning the same type of information. So our school system no longer worked. So along comes this guy named Spearman, and Spearman says, okay, well, if our school system doesn't work, then we're going to have to figure out a way to label children and adjust based on their capabilities. So he developed what he called intelligence in as a general factor, general intelligence, G factor model. Now his G factor model was broken off from very specific abilities. Okay, his for example, for certain children to be able to have a higher G factor, a G score, they were looked at in different areas as memory. Remember, because we use the word memorizing, right? So Spearman looked at that as well. Memory, geez, I'm having a hard time today writing. He also looked at attention and concentration. I'll put attention. Looked at verbal comprehension. Also looked at vocabulary. Spatial skills. So when I say spatial skills, being able to manipulate the space around you, the environment around you. Like, for example, an example of spatial skills, somebody with high spatial capability. If you were to shut your eyes, close your eyes right now, or blindfold yourselves, could you maneuver the room without bumping into anything? Okay. Your ability to be aware of your environment and manipulate it very well. That's spatial abilities. And abstract reasoning. Okay. So that was Spearman's ideas of what constitutes intelligence. Abstract reasoning. Yeah. All right. So what's the problem with that? So if we're going to label somebody either bright, which he did, which is one of his terms that he used, or dull. That's right. He called children, he referred to children as dull. Why would that not be a fair assessment of somebody's IQ based on these items, based on these factors? What do you think? What is the limitation to saying how smart somebody is based on these 7 factors, 6 factors? Whew.
Because some may be some may be like higher in maybe specific areas.
Okay, yeah. So for example, vocabulary. What is vocabulary dependent upon? What you have access to, your schooling, your what you've been exposed to through the school system or education, right? So if a child has not been provided books or taught how to read, does that make them less intelligent? Probably not, right? Especially if we look at many of the other areas. Maybe they have a great memory. Maybe they have very focused attention. They're able to understand words, great spatial reasoning or spatial skills and good abstract reasoning, but low on vocabulary. So that was one of the flaws that they encountered with that. So along came another theorist. Well, and we're I wanted blue anyway. So Gardner considered multiple intelligence. So maybe multiple intelligence scales, intelligences. Okay. So maybe just because they're not good at math doesn't necessarily mean that they're not intelligent. They're just not, they don't have an aptitude for math. So he looked at 9 factors for intelligence. So any one of these, verbal or linguistic, musical, logical, or mathematical, math, I'll just put math here. Visual or spatial, similar, right? Movement, interpersonal, intrapersonal, naturalist, and existentialist. Okay. So what Gardner was saying is that just because one person may not have a high musical ability, like for example, you know, my brother I consider to be very highly intelligent. He's great at math. He's a great sportsman, and he's able to talk to people very well. He's very charismatic. However, not great at musical. Does that make him less intelligent? So what Gardner's looking at is not saying that a person has to contain all nine of these factors to be considered intelligent, but they may excel in one or more of these areas, which could we could really consider them to be intelligent. So we stepped a little bit further away from aptitude, right? From the traditional math and reading, and we're looking at more of their abilities. Like for example, who knows somebody that they would consider to be a musical genius? Anybody you would consider to be a musical genius or high in musical intelligence?
Elton John.
Elton John, okay. Very good music. Who?
Stevie Wonder.
Stevie Wonder, yeah, right. Absolutely. Who else?
Paul McCartney.
Paul McCartney, okay. Mozart, Yo-Yo Ma. I think when I think musical abilities, I think Yo-Yo Ma, who's not a rapper, by the way. He's a famous cellist. He played for the president when he was 7 years old. He probably knew music before he even knew how to read. So very, very, very brilliant individual. So he has really a high intelligence when it comes to music. Math, I think he's really good at math. I would say he's probably great interpersonal. When I think, how about interpersonal? Who would you consider to be really intelligent in interpersonal or intrapersonal? What comes to mind? I would say like Oprah. I think that Oprah is highly intelligent. Maybe she's not good at math or music, but you know, high verbal ability, high interpersonal and intrapersonal, right? Existentialists, right? We would consider like maybe philosophers to be high in that area. How about movement, like athleticism? Who would you consider to be highly intelligent as an athlete?
Saquon Barkley.
Okay. Are you a Penn State fan?
No, I'm a Giants fan.
Oh, okay. All right. He was at Penn State. So I watched him as kind of grow up through the ranks and at the Penn State games. Yeah, really. Yeah, very, very athletic, right? I think, I mean, even listening to him speak, I think of him as very intelligent verbally and probably interpersonally as well. But yeah, if you think of athletes that are really, really good at what they do, we would consider them highly intelligent in that area, right? So, you know, and again, this is just another way to look at intelligence. Another one yet is how we might measure success, right? So what is success? What do we consider successful? It might be somebody that's able to get a job, right? To be able to provide for their families or themselves, not have to worry about anything, have enough money that they don't have to worry about anything, may like their job, attaining a job that they enjoy doing. We consider success in many different facets, don't we? So Sternberg, look at Sternberg's theory. Sternberg, he came up with the triarchic theory of intelligence. And what he really wanted to see is how are we able to solve our problems. So he marked intelligence as somebody that's able to meet their goals and do that systematically. And this really is important, especially when we start getting into mental health, because people that suffer from mental health sometimes aren't able to solve their goals, right? Or solve their problems or meet their goals. And that's really the overarching issue with many can't talk anymore today. Many mental health disorders is the inability to come up with a different solution to solve your goals. So for example, if somebody's going through really tough financial times, okay, that might lead to depression because they're stuck, they're feeling hopeless, they're feeling blue. That's not to say that they're incapable of doing it. It just means that they're not able to figure out a solution to their problem. And it might be hard for some people. I'm not in any way saying that depression is from laziness or a lack of trying, but what it is from is feeling like they don't have a solution to their situation. Okay. That's where depression and anxiety come from. So able to meet those goals is really, really important with mental health. And really, as a therapist, that's what I do. I work with people and help them strategize. I don't necessarily give them an answer as to what they can do, but I help them come up with ways themselves, because if they come up with the answer themselves, then they're more likely to maintain that routine or use different strategies or be creative in their way of approaching their issues, right? So anyway, Sternberg looked at 3 areas. He looked at analytical factors. He looked at creative factors. Creative. And he also looked at practical. He kind of put them on a continuum where they intertwine. So just because somebody is highly analytical doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to meet their goals, does it? Why not? Like if we're able to break down, so what do I mean by analytical? Analytical is breaking down problems into simple components and then solving from there. So why is being analytical alone not going to achieve your goal? Am I being too broad? All right. You got a silent crowd today, Jen. I don't know what's happening. So people that are analytical may be able to solve problems, but not every time, because not every problem is going to be solved analytically. All right. Let me give you an example. If we were to consider, like, say, a car is anybody that's a mechanic will say your car starts sputtering. All right. And based on your previous experience, you know that maybe you ran out of gas once. So you pull off, you look at your gas gauge and you see that you have a little bit of gas left, but just in case, you fill up your car and see if the sputtering goes away, and it doesn't. Okay, so now you're stuck. You ran through your entire inventory of problem solving. You broke down the problem and you tried to solve it, but it didn't fix it. So a person that's analytical would probably exhaust their efforts through what has worked for them in the past, but they lack creativity. So they don't necessarily meet their goal. They're not able to solve their problem. So that brings up the other part is creativity. Be able to come up with novel ways or view the problem in novel ways. Okay. So trying something different. Remember, we talked Monday about trial and error, using trial and error. That would require being creative. Now, being creative and analytical are great concepts, and they might help you meet some goals, but not all. What about, like, for example, I'll give you an example. When I was really young, I didn't actually run out of gas, but my car broke down. I had this, for some reason, you know, my mom and I were very close. Broke down on the side of the road, and I desired to call my mom. She lived 15 hours away. You know, she's not a great mechanic. You know, it really didn't do any good. It would not have done me any good to call my mom. Yeah, it would have been great to have her support because I was really upset about it, but it was not practical. It did not solve the problem. So that's what practical is using the information and knowing what's going to work and what's not going to work. So again, we want really a balance of in between here, having a reasonable amount of analytical, creative, and practical intelligence to solve our problem. Okay. So somebody said earlier, they brought up IQ. What is IQ? What does IQ stand for?
Intelligence quotient.
Okay, intelligence. I'm just going to abbreviate intelligence quotient.
A
Quotient.
measurement for
Yeah.
intelligence.
It's a measurement, right? Very similar to what we have for, let's say, like tornadoes. Tornadoes have like what, F1 through F5, right? It's a scale, and the quotient actually comes from the old days when they actually measured IQ equaled mental age divided by current age, okay, or chronological age. So what this really broke down, I'll use an example. We'll say Billy, he's 10 years old. All right. So we measure Billy's visual or spatial skills, abstract reasoning. We check his analogies, and we find that Billy is about on par with an 8-year-old population. Based on his scores, we're going to match that up to about average of what an 8-year-old would be able to do. Okay. So that's his mental age based on what his capabilities are versus divided by his chronological age gives us 0.8, right? If we divide that number times 100, we get 80. So that's what IQ is. Billy's IQ would be 80. Okay. And I'll explain what that means here in a minute. So conversely, if we look at, say, Susie, Susie comes along and she takes the exact same test, and they assess that Susie is also 10, but she's doing tasks that are on about average of what 12-year-olds are doing. Okay. So we would assess her mental age as being 12, but her chronological age is 8, giving us a 1.2 times 100 equals 120. We would assess Susie's IQ to be 120. Okay. And that may not mean a whole lot to you until we look at averages. And if you remember, if you've ever taken a statistics course, you would know that this is a bell curve. So right about here at the top of this, let me use a different color. At the top of this bell is our dead average. It's like right in between. It's middle of the road comparative to what everybody else scored. So what we're looking at here is maybe 10-year-olds. We'll say this is a 10-year-old bell curve. All right. So based on all of the 10-year-olds that have taken this test, this is the range that they scored in. But as we know with the IQ, we're going to say, because if you're on average, so if a 10-year-old takes a test, takes that IQ test and does exactly what a 10-year-old would do, that would give us 100. So we know that 100 is exactly middle of the road. That is dead average. Okay. So any child or person that gets a 100 IQ, they're on average with their age group. Now, Susie, what did we say Susie was? 120, right? So Susie is right about here. Now, 130, we consider exceptional. We consider gifted, 130 and above. All right. So she's right up here. She's pretty high above average. And then we have Billy, who was down here, who had, what did we say? 80, right? I think we assessed him at an 80. Conversely, on the opposite side, we're looking at getting a little bit closer to 70. Now, 70 by our standards, by our school standards, is considered cognitive development deficiency. Okay, so that they aren't able to really adapt to their environment very well. Usually below 70, we're seeing life skills impairment, significant life skills impairment. Now, what does that mean? People with life skill impairment may have a difficult time living independently. And reason being, they may not be able to get out of safety in time. So for example, if they leave something on the stove, again, think of it in terms of attention and being able to focus. Some people just have accidents and they forget this. But with somebody that has a cognitive impairment, they're likely going to create unsafe environments and then not know how to get out of those unsafe environments. So it becomes a safety issue. And we look at that for anybody that has below a 70 IQ. All right. Does this all make sense? Am I losing anybody? We good so far?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So what do we use to assess IQ? To assess somebody's IQ, we use the two most popular that we use today. Oh, and by the way, we don't really measure IQ by mental age and chronological age anymore. That was an old way of doing it. It's now a much more complex way. And we use Stanford Binet, which is an IQ, an intelligence test. We also use, let's say Wechsler. It's and they have two of them. They have one for children, so that's the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for children, or for the adults, it would be Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale. Okay, and they both really measure. They both really measure the same thing. They look at spatial ability, they look at vocabulary, they look at processing speed. And based on all those abilities and whether they're high or low, they come out as averages, and we're able to get an IQ that way. It still really means the same thing. So if you get 100 on either of these two tests, we know that you're probably right around average, okay, with where you should be. And if you're higher, if you have a higher IQ, that means you're probably, well, you are above average, or lower would be below average. All right. So you probably have taken other tests like SAT. Has anybody taken an SAT in this class?
Yeah.
Okay. Some of you may have taken an ACT, right? They have prep tests. They have CLEPs. Okay. Are these considered intelligence? Are these a good measure of intelligence? What do you think?
No.
Why not? What do these measure?
They measure knowledge.
Knowledge, right? Aptitude. These are aptitude tests. So I had somebody from my last class, they brought up a really good example. They said that they went to school with a girl, high school, and this girl who was valedictorian wasn't really known to be that intelligent. They didn't consider her to be, there were other people that were really good at math and didn't have to work so hard. So what was the difference? Why was she valedictorian and people that would have been considered probably higher intelligence, why weren't they valedictorian? What do you think? What did she do that other people didn't?
Maybe the activities she did.
Okay.
What is
Sports,
it?
or
It
she
could be a
like
work ethic. I'm
volunteer.
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. What were you saying, Raymond?
I was gonna say like a work ethic issue. Like someone could be naturally
Right.
like mathematically smarter than someone else, but that doesn't mean that you're working as hard as them or you're completing as much work as them.
Right. And that was their point. And he asked me that. He was curious as to, he knew that she worked really, really hard to do that. He said, and he bragged a little and said that he got high marks, but he didn't work nearly half as hard as she did. He didn't get valedictorian, nor was he trying to get it. But she was able to get 4.0s in all of her classes. And she just dedicated herself to doing that. And that's motivation. And we're going to talk about motivation I think in 2 chapters. But her motivation was high to complete these tasks. But valedictorian isn't really a measure of IQ. It's a measure of work ethic and being able to pick up. I mean, obviously, it was a measure of her aptitude too, because she had 4.0s, right? So anyway, yeah, all these tests measure our aptitude. They don't necessarily, you can, and my point really bringing this up is you can change aptitude. So if you take an SAT, say you get an 800 the first time you take an SAT, and then the next time you take the SAT, you really, really study, you get a tutor, you wind up getting those, I'm not sure what the test prep books are out there, but you get a test prep book or audio or something like that, and you wind up bringing your SAT score up to a 1300, which is really, really high, right? IQ doesn't work that way. IQ we see as being relatively stable throughout the lifespan of the individual. All right, so we'll say Billy gets an 80 on his IQ. We test him again when he's 19, 20, 25, 30 years old. We can expect to get around an 80. It may waver a point or two or a couple points, but relatively around that area, he's going to maintain that intelligence. Now, somebody from, let's say Susie gets a 120. She has a 120 IQ at 10 years old, and we measure her at 30, and maybe we assess her at 90, okay? That could happen. On rare occasions, it does happen. In those cases, it's usually because of some kind of, maybe like a brain virus or some kind of trauma or something significant happened in Susie's life that she has lost some kind of cognitive ability. Okay, so that can happen on rare occasions. So when I say it remains relatively stable, barring any kind of intervention or interference, usually if Susie would probably be on track to have 120 IQ if nothing else happened. All right. So really that's it. That's how I kind of wanted just to talk about IQ. And again, when we get into mental health, it's going to be looking at IQ, because I measure people's IQs if, especially with children, if they come in and we're seeing some aptitude abilities. Maybe they're misbehaving in school, or they might be displaying some kind of oppositional defiance of some sort. I look at their IQ as their ability to problem solve. So if I have a child that's acting out in class, it could be for a number of reasons. Maybe he has higher energy than his peers. Maybe he's got something going on. Either he's not able to learn well. So I'll check his intelligence to see if he is able to put 2 and 2 together, because if not, that school setting might not be appropriate for that child. Okay. All right. Any questions on intelligence, IQ, how we measure IQ, or cognition in general? Any comments or questions or anything?
I was wondering if you could go over the 9-dot solution from last time.
The what?
The 9-dot solution with like the square with the 9 dots, and you had to connect the line.
Oh, that's right. Oh, I forgot about that. Okay. All right. Thank you for reminding me. So did anybody come up with this?
Unfortunately,
Mom got it, like, so fast.
What's that?
My mom got it really fast.
Oh, she did. Okay. All right. Yeah. Did she do it before?
No, she said she didn't. She's a math teacher though, so she likes solving problems.
All right. I forgot I brought this up with it. This is the only class I did this with. So did anybody, does anybody care to share? If not, I'll share my screen here. Okay. All right. So remember when we were talking about thinking outside the box, right? Getting creative. And this was an example of that. So when we use our instructional processing, right? We see, now your instructions were what? Connect all the dots. All dots have to be connected. Couldn't lift pen, right? And what was the other one? Forgot. Oh, 4. You have to have 4 lines. So our experience teaches us, because we're raised in a society where we stay within the lines, right? We stay within our boundaries. We don't go outside of that. This is really a measure to see how creative people can be. And we can do this by going outside. Pretty clever, right? But you couldn't do that if you stayed within the boundaries of these 9 dots, but that wasn't part of the rules. All right, so pretty cool, right? So great trick. You can challenge your friends at parties or whatever. But yeah, all you got to do for give them the rules, give them the dots, and see who gets it. All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, if nothing else, I'm going to stop recording. I hope the